Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine. Today we are going back to an old little mini-series. I guess at this point I'm just going to keep adding to it, so it's going to get much bigger. But it's the Grape Deep Dive series. So when we choose a grape that is very common or uncommon in the wine world and kind of dive into it, learn a little bit more about it, and if it's one that is found in many places, learn about all the different places that it is made. And so as I'm recording this, it is a beautiful, sunny spring day, and it is definitely getting me in the vibe for summer. And I know this is going to be releasing in like late spring-ish, getting us into summer. So I figured what better grape to talk about than Sauvignon Blanc. I feel like this is like the spring, summer grape. And it is, of course, a favorite of many, and it is considered a noble grape. It is, at the top of the list, and it is grown nearly everywhere around the world. So I'll start you off before we kind of dive into all the little nitty gritty details of this. I thought it'd be fun to kind of share my Sauvignon Blanc story and how I first learned about Sauvignon Blanc and really got into it. One of my favorite wines before I really got into wine was a Sauvignon Blanc. It was a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc by the producer Noblio. And I actually can remember the very first time that I tried this wine. My husband and I had moved to Seattle. We were still living in the apartment. So that meant it was within like the first year that we had moved to Seattle. And his parents were in Portland, but they came up to visit. And then we went out to visit like some distant family of his. This is the only time I think I've ever met them. But they lived somewhere near Seattle and they invited us to their home, which was beautiful. And they grilled out and they served Noblio Sauvignon Blanc at the table. And I just remember loving it. It was such a fresh, easy drinking wine that I took a picture of it. So then that way, when I went to the grocery store, I could pick it up. And then that kind of basically started a little habit of like, every time I was at the grocery store, I grabbed a bottle of Noblio because we would drink it with dinner one of the nights that week. And like, just continued to do that. That was the wine that I always had in my fridge. And so Noblio Sauvignon Blanc will always have a special place in my heart. I honestly, which is funny, I don't drink a lot of Sauvignon Blanc now, but I actually just did a Cork Crew tasting all about these two Sauvignon Blancs from Loire Valley. So I have had a taste of those and I was reminded of, how fresh and delicious and fun and how perfect for warm weather Sauvignon Blanc is. So all that said, let's dive in to the nitty gritty and learn more about Sauvignon Blanc. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. So starting off, Sauvignon Blanc is considered an aromatic white grape. Basically, it just produces a lot of aromas. And it originated in the Loire Valley of France. The Loire Valley is located on the western side of France, kind of like north central area. It starts along the Atlantic Ocean, and then it comes in towards the middle of the country until you reach basically almost the middle of France. Most of the Sauvignon Blanc is more inland, so it's not right along the coast. Sauvignon Blanc itself, the name is derived from the French word sauvage, which means wild, savage, right? As the vines are very reminiscent of wild grapevines. They will just do their thing if you let them. And fun fact on Sauvignon Blanc, it is actually a parent of Cabernet Sauvignon. So when you're creating a new grape, one way to do that is for one grape to essentially fertilize a different type of grape. And so this happened with Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. And together they created Cabernet Sauvignon, which I feel like for a lot of people that like is considered like the dominant grape or like the top grape. So it's like funny to think that like Sauvignon Blanc actually came first. In terms of the viticulture, just in case you want to get into the details on the grapes and the vines, reminder that grapevines, any wine grapevines are dormant over the winter. So they kind of look dead, but they're not. They're just like sleeping. And the first sign of life is usually bud break in the spring. And surprisingly, Sauvignon Blanc develops their buds quite late. But the thing is that they ripen early, and that's how it works out, and that's how we don't get it. There is a really strong acidity in Sauvignon Blanc, but it's not overwhelming. And technically, Sauvignon Blanc is best grown in cool and moderate climates, though it can accommodate itself, I guess. I'm like, how do I want to say that? It can adapt. That's the word I'm looking for. It can adapt to warmer climates if it is encouraged, I suppose you could say. The wine itself, again, is just very fresh, easy drinking. A lot of times I think of it as the perfect summer wine. For flavors, I'm going to wait to tell you like a lot of the different flavors because I think it depends on where the grapes were grown and where you're getting your Sauvignon Blanc from. But there are two really unique aromas that you can find in your Sauvignon Blanc, and they actually come from chemical compounds that are found in the wine itself and in the thing that it smells like. This will make sense when I tell you what they are. So the first one is this very green aromatic, and I always call it that, but I think another way to think of it is like green bell pepper, also pea sprout, like just this very vegetal kind of smell, and that comes from a compound called methoxypyrazines, or just pyrazines for short. And these pyrazines are also found in green bell pepper, believe it or not, which is so cool that like that's why you're getting that smell. It does not mean that there's green bell pepper in your wine. It just means that compound shows up in both of those. And this is important to know because I'm going to tell you the next thing that shows up and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, is that in my wine? It's not, don't worry. But a real tasting note for Sauvignon Blanc is cat pee. Yes, I did just say cat pee. That is what your wine could smell like. And this is caused by a unique chemical compound called 4-MMP. I'm sure it has a long name, but I didn't even bother looking it up because I knew I couldn't say it. So it's just 4-MMP. And it is literally a compound that is found in both Sauvignon Blanc and in cat pee. Again, I promise there is no cat pee in your wine. It is just a compound that is found in both, and so it gives off that smell. Other common aromas is this pronounced minerality. And remember, when we think of minerality smells, it's like the smell of a waterfall hitting the rocks or the smell of the pavement after it's just rained. And then we also have these fresh fruit flavors. What kind of fruit? That will depend on where the grapes were grown. And all of this, all of the flavor, and honestly, even the structure of the wine, which I'm going to talk about next, it's very dependent on the terroir. And that is, again, that fancy French word that means the place where it's grown. And so there are a lot of things we could say about Sauvignon Blanc, but in the end, if we had, 6 to 10 different Sauvignon Blancs in front of you, all from different places, they are all going to taste different. And not only that, but also winemaking styles can affect the type of Sauvignon Blanc and the flavors that you get. And we're going to talk about that. But first, for the structure of a Sauvignon Blanc, typically, even, across the board, no matter what you do, you're going to get a natural high acidity. Typically, you're going to find that Sauvignon Blancs are lighter bodied, lower alcohol. They can have a hint of residual sugar, but that high acidity is going to keep it from going sweet. You're not even going to notice. It might give it like a slight richness, but again, you might not even notice. Unless, of course, you're blending it with Semillon and making Sauterne in Bordeaux. And we'll talk more on that later. But again, structure depends on terroir and it depends on winemaking styles. Now, a couple different things. When we keep saying terroir is like the place and where the grapes were grown, right? And there are a lot of different things that can contribute to that. So a couple of those things I'm going to talk about: the elevation, the climate, and even the type of soil that the grapevines are grown in. So for elevation, any grapevines that are grown at least, let's say, 600 to 1,000 meters above sea level, they're going to produce wines with this very pronounced freshness and vibrancy. Now, when we're talking about climate, a warmer climate, you're going to get more tropical fruit, higher alcohol, and richer mouthfeel. Generally, again, you could probably find a wine that proves me wrong very easily on this. So, keep in mind, these are very, very general. Now, cooler climate, you're going to have more citrus, lower alcohol, and you're more likely to have those mineral notes. Remember that, like waterfall or the pavement after it's rained. It's just a little fresher, a little less sweet fruit. Okay, and now this is the total, I'm going to dork out for a second. Feel free to just daydream for the next 30 seconds because I'm going to tell you a little bit about different soil types and how they affect the wine. And if you're like, oh my gosh, you're getting way too deep for me, that's okay. Just keep listening. We'll get back into certain styles into that. But if you want to dork out with me, listen in. Let's talk about the different soils. So Sauvignon Blanc isn't picky. It doesn't need a specific soil to grow in. So some examples of soils that it's grown in and then how it affects it. So first, you could have a loamy soil. This is a well-draining soil. It's rich in nutrients, and it's often found in the premium wine-growing regions and supports the grape's growth while preserving its natural acidity. Now, you could also have it growing in gravel, and this is found in a lot of areas of Bordeaux. And gravel, again, it aids in drainage and it reflects heat. So it assists in the grape's ripening process. So you're going to get some good fruit flavor from that. And it's okay if it's a cooler climate where they bud late because the gravel is going to help reflect the sun and the warmth. And so those grapes will ripen by the time that you need to pick them and make the wine. Now, you'll also find clay. This is prominent in parts of the Loire Valley. And speaking of soil in the Loire Valley, we're going to get a little deeper when we get to the Loire Valley. So hold on to your britches. But in Loire Valley, we have a lot of clay-rich soil. They tend to produce wines with a fuller bodied and, again, that pronounced minerality. Then we have silt. And silt is a fine-grained soil. It offers good water retention, so it leads to richer, more aromatic wines. And then finally, you have chalk, and this is predominant in the region of Sancerre, which is in the Loire Valley. And chalky soils give the wine a really nice crispness and a certain kind of finesse in aromas. I think a lot of times Sancerre is described as elegant. And I know that doesn't mean anything, but I think when you try it and then try something else that's maybe a little bigger, a little bolder, it does make sense a little bit. Maybe not all the time. But to me, thinking of a wine as elegant is that kind of crispness and it's really finesse. It's not hitting you across the face with a lot of flavor, but the more you taste it and the more you dive into it, you start to pull things out of it. And chalk soil is what kind of produces a Sauvignon Blanc that does that. Now, we also mentioned that winemaking style can affect the type of Sauvignon Blanc that you have and the flavors and the structure. So most Sauvignon Blanc is made using stainless steel fermentation. And so this basically means that when they are fermenting the grapes, so when they're letting the yeast eat the sugar and produce the alcohol, they're doing this inside stainless steel tanks. And what this does is it preserves the natural acidity and the vibrant fruit flavor. It does not add any flavor, which oak would do. And it also doesn't let the wine oxidize as much. It has no contact with oxygen when it's in that stainless steel tank. So it really showcases the varietal's true expression. You get a lot of fresh and zesty flavors. And that's honestly a big reason why Sauvignon Blanc is known for these flavors as well, because that's the style that they make it in. Now, you can do other things when making Sauvignon Blanc. You do have the option of using oak barrels. You can use them for fermentation or for aging. So fermentation, again, is when they, go from grape juice to wine. But you can age Sauvignon Blanc for a little bit of time in an oak barrel. And what this will do is it adds complexity and texture. It can also, if it's a newer barrel, impart flavors of vanilla, spice, and toast, and again, give it that kind of creamy mouthfeel. Oak barrels with your Sauvignon Blanc, you might see this more in Bordeaux, and you might also see this more in California as well, as this is a style that I've seen there. Another option that will affect the style of wine is lees aging. And when I say lees, it is Lees. And lees are essentially dead yeast cells. So once the fermentation process has finished, the yeast has eaten all of the sugar and it's produced alcohol. There's no more sugar for the yeast to eat. They die and they become lees. And there is an option with some wines that you can leave them in contact with the lees. And Sauvignon Blanc is one of those wines. It'll add this layer of richness and complexity. And this technique is often used in Bordeaux and Casablanca and also in Pouilly-Fumé, where this is in the Loire Valley. And this is where they're trying to get a little bit more of a fuller bodied and enhanced mouthfeel. It can also add a few flavors like subtle, nutty, yeasty kind of bread, fresh baked bread notes to the wine. And then lastly, less commonly found with Sauvignon Blanc, but it definitely happens. Well, I shouldn't say, so one of them is blending. So you can blend it with other grapes. And I shouldn't say that's less common. I mean, you do see it and it does blend well with other grapes. You probably see it the most in Bordeaux, where it is blended with Semillon and Muscadel. And it creates wines with, you can get more complexity. You can get more balance because you're adding different grapes and different wines that are known for different things to that. And we'll talk about this more in the Bordeaux section, is typically a Sauterne is a blend of Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. Lastly, there is an option to do skin contact with a Sauvignon Blanc wine. And that is, remember, so most of the time when you're making a white wine, you're going to press the juice off of the grape skins, I should say. And then you're going to get rid of the grape skins. You do not want that. You're going to get rid of those. But with skin contact, you're going to leave that juice in contact with the skins and the seeds. And it can add these additional flavors, different aromas. A lot of times they go a little funky. This is what an orange wine is. It is a skin contact white wine. And it just adds this complexity and texture. Sometimes it works. I will also admit that sometimes it does not, at least in my opinion. Okay, now that we kind of have an idea of all the different types of Sauvignon Blancs we could make, let's dive into some popular regions for if you want to try some Sauvignon Blanc. Hey, wine lover, interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been thinking, I'd love to taste wine live with Haley. I mean, who isn't thinking that? Well, say hello to the Cork Crew, my virtual tasting club where wine meets fun, learning, and the best happy hour you've ever had, all from the comfort of your couch. Every month, we explore a new wine theme together. You'll get expert tips, delicious food pairings, and stories that bring each bottle to life. You can order the feature wines from my partner shop, grab something similar locally, or just sip whatever you've already got. No pressure and no wine purchase required in this club. In 2025, I've made this club even better. You get to choose between 2 tasting dates each month, and everything is recorded so you can catch up anytime. We've also just launched our exclusive Cork Crew app, where you'll find all of your event info, wine recommendations, community connection, all in one place. It is accessible via your phone or your computer. As a member, you'll also get 6 free guest passes so you can invite friends, quarterly wine trivia nights, winemaker Q&As, a private online community, discounts on private tastings, and so much more. And when I say everyone is welcome, I mean everyone. Whether you're brand new to wine or a total cork dork like me, you'll fit right in. Loud or quiet, wine curious or wine obsessed, this space is for you. Join today and get your first 2 months for just $8 a month. I mean, heck, that's like a drink at Starbucks. Use code WINESPECIAL, no spaces, or you can save $80 on the yearly membership. When you sign up for the annual subscription, use code WINESPECIAL-YEAR. Head to thecorkcrew.com, that's thecorkcrew.com to sign up, and I'll see you at our next tasting. Cheers! First, we got to talk about its homeland. Let's talk about the Loire Valley in France. In the Loire Valley, this wine is going to be very food friendly, just like most wines from France. The idea is essentially that you're not drinking it unless you have food in front of you. And we'll talk about some pairings at the very end of this episode. The Loire has a cooler climate, so you're going to expect higher acidity, lighter bodied. They do not add they do not leave behind any residual sugar, I should say. And they also don't add sugar. So these are considered dry wines most often. Common flavors. So if you're looking for one from the Loire Valley, you might get flavors like grapefruit. So that's the fruit that you're getting, and sometimes guava. So it can go a little tropical. Then you're getting this minerality and almost flinty or smoky. And then also this green note of freshly mowed grass. And the main area, so Loire Valley is in France. And in France, they typically like to label their wine by region, remember, right? Even Loire Valley is a region, but we need to even go deeper into that and get to sub-regions within the Loire Valley for when you're looking for these wines to give them a try. The top two Sauvignon Blancs from the Loire Valley are Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. And these are two regions. They're just on opposite sides of the Loire River, and they are further, like the furthest inland for the most part in the Loire Valley. Pouilly-Fumé, if you hear that fumé, that is actually smoke, and that is what that region was named after because that region produces a Sauvignon Blanc that is fairly smoky in aroma. And then Sancerre is known, very well known, for their Sauvignon Blanc. It is the only white that they make. They do make some like reds from Pinot Noir. But typically when people talk about a Sancerre, they are talking about Sauvignon Blanc. You can also get Sauvignon Blanc in two other regions in the like far east of the Loire Valley, and that would be Rieuli and Quincy. And then you can also find some really affordable, like Sancerre, you're probably going to have to pay at least $30, maybe $25 to $30 for a bottle. Pouilly-Fumé is also going to be up there. The other two, Rieuli and Quincy, maybe not so much. But Touraine, you can easily get a great bottle for like $15, $16. It's just not as well known. It's not that it's not good. Okay, and then I also mentioned we were going to dive a little deeper into soil types. This is mainly because I just did that cork-cru tasting, and we actually got to try. We tried a Sancerre and a Touraine right next to each other, and it was really fun to notice the differences and then also realize that like the winemaking styles had such an impact on this, even as much as the soil type did. It was a really, really fun class, and that's honestly why I had to tell you a little bit more about the soils in the Loire Valley, because we had to do the research, I had to do it anyway, so I might as well tell you about it. So in the Loire Valley specifically, some different soil types we're looking at. So you have terre blanche, and this is essentially, it means white earth, and it specifically has this type of limestone called Kimmeridgian limestone. It's this marl limestone that is really slow to warm, and it lends to this richness and texture in the wines. Then you have Cayote soil, and this is a Portlandian limestone or Oxfordian limestone. And again, stony. This is quick to warm, so you get more of a lean, early maturing wine with very vibrant notes of stone fruit. Then you have Silex or flint, and this is rocky with flint and clay. This soil, like the terre blanche, the white earth, is slower to warm. So you get this richness and texture, but also because of the flint, you get this reductive character, and that's that smoke and that gun flint. And then you will also find a lot of sandy soil in the Loire Valley, but that is primarily used for red grapes. So that's where they're growing Pinot Noir, and they're making these lightly colored, fruity red and rosé wines. Okay, our next region is, we're staying in France, one more region in France, and that is Bordeaux. So in Bordeaux, you're going to have more floral flavors. We have honeysuckle, beeswax, lemongrass, and the fruit is more like stone fruit, like peach. And we'll also have a little salinity note from the soil, which is interesting because you're not really near the ocean. Bordeaux is fairly continental, but this is coming from the soil. Now in Bordeaux, you're going to find Sauvignon Blanc often blended with Semillon. They also are going to do a lot of that lees contact. Remember, LEES, those are the dead yeast cells, which add, more of a richer mouthfeel. They might also do barrel aging here. And this is how they get that rich flavor, like the honeysuckle and the white peach. Now, Sauvignon Blanc, I usually think of as being very affordable, and that is 100% true. But of course, everything can get expensive in Bordeaux. Not every Sauvignon Blanc from Bordeaux is expensive. I mean, you can get a lot of great Bordeaux Blanc is what it will typically be called. You won't see Sauvignon Blanc on the label. It'll say Bordeaux Blanc. And you can get them for like $15, $20 easy, and they're great. But there are some famous examples like Chateau Haut-Brion Blanc, and that is $1,000 per bottle, at least at the time that I did the research for this. So who knows? It could have gone up from there. I also mentioned earlier that Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc can be blended together, and then they actually create this sweet wine called Sauterne. And I've probably talked about it. I feel like I had a sweet wine podcast. I'll look and put it in the show notes for you if I find it. That talks more about this wine, which is made from grapes that literally have rot on them, which is wild. And it is so cool. And part of that wine is Sauvignon Blanc, which I think nobody would guess, but it helps out so much with the sweetness. It has such a bright acidity that it makes for a really perfectly balanced dessert wine. All right, now if we're moving out of France, the next place that most people will think of when we think of Sauvignon Blanc, and honestly, they probably thought of this before France, is New Zealand. So here, the flavors, you're going to get passion fruit, guava, lime, green pepper. You can get a little bit of that pyrazine note, remember. Gooseberry, which I have never had a gooseberry, but everybody who tells me that they've ever smelled a gooseberry, they're like, that is Sauvignon Blanc. So I kept it in here just in case you've ever had a gooseberry and you know what those smell like. You can also get kiwi and our favorite tasting note or aroma note for Sauvignon Blanc, cat pee, is also somewhat common in a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is grown all over both the North and South Island of New Zealand, but it's most famous from the region of Marlborough, which is on the northern tip of the southern island. The wines from this region can be razor sharp. It is normal to see a gram or two of residual sugar in these wines in particular because the acidity is so high. But again, remember, with the acidity so high, you're not going to taste it. It's like a good glass of lemonade, almost like a tart lemonade, where you can add sugar, but that acidity covers up the sugar. Now, New Zealand is considered a New World region. Remember, when we say Old World, it means pretty much anywhere in Europe, versus New World is anywhere outside of Europe. And typically, newer world regions tend to be a little warmer, a little more fruit forward in their winemaking. But New Zealand is actually still a cooler climate. It is the coolest maritime climate in the New World. No vineyard is more than 80 miles from the sea, so that has a huge effect on this. One thing, though, on why they can ripen the grapes as well as they can for being so cool is they have a long growing season. This gives the grapes time to ripen fully, and they experience nearly twice the UV radiation as any other grape growing region due to this unusually thin ozone layer. So it results in really high sun exposure for the grapes, which helps them ripen. One of the main climate concerns in New Zealand is lots of rain. This can lead to moldy grapes, and not the good kind of mold that we use when we make that sweet wine in Bordeaux, but the kind that can result in this stewed green vegetable taste in the wine, and we definitely don't want that. So one of the solutions that they found was to develop a new trellising system. So that's basically how, like, when you think of trellis, I think the trellising system that's the most common is like the T version, where the trunk of the grapevine goes up and then the branches of the vine go out in like a T shape and then follow the trellis. But here they made a different version and did different viticulture techniques to promote ripeness and maturity, which led to this fresh, ripe, green flavor in the wine and not that stewed green vegetable that we don't want. There are a lot of mountains in New Zealand, but unfortunately, most of them are too steep and they have too much erosion to grow grapes on. So most of the vineyards are actually planted on flat plains or rolling hills. There are various soil types in New Zealand. I'm not going to go over all of them this time around, but I can in a specific New Zealand episode if you're interested. But the reason for this is because it's on an active juncture of two major tectonic plates. So, I mean, the three soils you'll get there, you got clay, volcanic, and river basin happening. Okay, now let's talk about Sauvignon Blanc from the Sonoma Valley in California. Now, California Sauvignon Blanc is still remarkably underappreciated, I think, across the world. I think in the U.S. we definitely see it a lot, but we also always think of, California Chardonnay. But what about California Sauvignon Blanc? The top examples from California can rival white Bordeaux in their sophistication and their aging potential. Sauvignon Blanc does not age usually, but if you can make it right and if it's grown in a special way, you can age it. A lot of these examples are racy, they're keen-edged, and they're refreshing. And again, they're good with food. They're kind of following that European style. And also, there was a recent quality shift. So historically, Sauvignon Blanc used to be more expensive to grow than Chardonnay. This was basically because, remember when I said that the name comes from sauvage, savage, it's wild. So they had to continually train it onto the trellis. They had to trim it all the time. It just took a lot of extra manpower and labor. But now growers are willing to commit those financial resources to do that because, one, wineries pay more for the Sauvignon Blanc now, And 2, the public demands it. People are loving Sauvignon Blanc. So if you're a Sauvignon Blanc lover, you are certainly not alone. One thing you may see on a California Sauvignon Blanc, and this actually comes from the Sonoma Valley in California, is Fumé Blanc, which sounds a lot like the Pouilly Fumé, right? And this is actually what the reference was to. It was coined in 1960 by Dry Creek Vineyard, and it was made popular by Robert Mondavi. This typically means that the Sauvignon Blanc used new oak, especially nowadays if people are using the term Fumé Blanc. They may be telling you, hey, this is done in a more traditional California style, which means that it had some new oak on it. But it's not a regulated term, so that I'm not guaranteeing that, but it's more like just a heads up. If you say Fumé Blanc from somewhere in California, it is likely a little bit richer, potentially has those oaky flavors. Not a bad thing, just good to know about. California Sauvignon Blanc, depending on where you're getting it from, is going to make a big difference. But if we're talking about Sonoma in particular, you're going to have passion fruit, pear, fresh herbs, and wet rocks, which I know that sounds weird, but it's an aroma, not a taste, right? No one's out there tasting wet rocks. It has higher acidity and then medium bodied. So a little bit more body, a little bit more weight to it than our cooler regions. This area does experience early morning fog and a diurnal shift. So remember, that's where the temperature is much different at night than it is during the daytime. Temperature drops a bunch. So it's not just a warm climate area. They do have these cooler influences. Okay, I think I have 2 more regions to talk to you about. So the first one is Stellenbosch, South Africa. And South Africa is an incredibly climatically diverse region. We should spend an entire podcast talking about even just parts of it. And there's really every kind of style of Sauvignon Blanc in South Africa, everything from super dry and crazy acidic to a more lush and fruity, fuller-bodied flavor. I don't know if I'm sure I've had a Sauvignon Blanc from Stellenbosch, South Africa, but I don't remember it much. But reading from a lot of other people's reviews, it appears to be very similar to a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So you're going to get flavors like green apple, lime, again, that gooseberry is coming up, the kiwi, and then some wet rock as well here. Okay, last regions, technically it's 2 more regions, but they're both in Chile, and this is Casablanca Valley and Leyda Valley. Now, specifically, Leyda, I had to mention this in here. There is such a distinct aroma I can remember from a blind tasting I did, and this was like one of the wines that I 100% got. I got the grape and I got where it was from because it was so clear because I'd had a wine that had this same note before, and this was exactly where it was from. It was a note of jalapeno. Like not even green bell pepper, jalapeno pepper. And I'd had that once before. It was a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. So when I was doing this blind tasting, I was like, I got this one. This one is very obviously a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. And I was right. It was specifically from the Leyda Valley. Now, both Casablanca and Leyda Valley, they're located along the Pacific coastline. They have the Humboldt Current, morning fog, and granite soils that all shape the flavor and profile of these wines. Chile is also famous for their organic, biodynamic, and regenerative agriculture practices that they do. And so that has a major impact on the Sauvignon Blanc that they're making, and also has an interest in a lot of people who are looking for more organic and biodynamic wines and care about these things. And Chile is honestly leading the charge in that. Now, going a little deeper into each of these valleys, Casablanca, cool climate, coastal valley. It's influenced by that Humboldt cold water current that in this case cools the wind that blows from west to east. Lower temps here and overcast days allow for longer ripening period for the grapes. They have a higher natural acidity, low production of sugar, so that leads to lower alcohol. If there's not a lot of sugar for the yeast to eat, not going to produce a lot of alcohol. And because we have that high natural acidity, we like that. It leads to a nice balanced wine. Flavors here, citrus fruit, a little bit of tropical, and just a lot of freshness. Soils in this region are older than those of the Andes Mountains. How cool is that? They're composed of granite, and they provide a sense of minerality and tension in your wine. Lastly, Leyda Valley. This is even cooler than Casablanca. Very vibrant acidity, lots of citrus, and also this herbal characteristic. Honestly, more similar to our New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc than the Casablanca. But one major difference from New Zealand, though similar to Casablanca, is the amount of sunlight hitting these grapes. The cloudy skies stop sunlight from hitting the grape skins, which preserves this natural acidity. It leads to a more crunchy, lasting acidity. This area has more clay inclusion in the soil, so it leads to more citrus and herbal flavors. Okay, I lied. I told you that I was done with the regions, but I actually have one more to tell you about, and that is the Adelaide Hills in Australia. Sauvignon Blanc is grown across many regions in Australia, but the place for Australian Sauvignon Blanc is Adelaide Hills. Again, this is a whole other podcast episode, I think, talking about different Australian wine regions. I think I've had a couple Australian winemakers, and then also the author Jane Lopes of the Australian Wine Book, which right now is currently packed up in a box for me. So I think we'll have to wait on the Australian wine podcast until I actually get that book out of the box that it is in. In the Adelaide Hills, you're going to get a cooler climate region, which I know sounds crazy for Australia, but it is a cooler region for Australia, and it's in South Australia. The wines here are described as textured, edgy, vibrant, and dry. And they are very specific to say, not like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So they are very different. Do not tell an Aussie that their Sauvignon Blancs are similar to New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. They are different. Okay, that's actually all the regions that I want to talk about. I could have mentioned so many more. Sauvignon Blanc is grown all over the world. I mean, it's grown here in Washington, and it is wonderful. I want to say I've had some up in the Finger Lakes as well, multiple places in Europe. I know I only really mentioned France, but you can also find it in Germany, in Spain, in Italy. I mean, it is just a grape that's grown everywhere. Let's talk a little logistics. So you learn about all those different regions. Maybe you go out and buy yourself a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc to try. What temperature should you serve it at? How old should you let it age? What's the cost? Let me tell you. So serving temperature, you're going to want it chilled. This is one of those that you could probably put in the fridge overnight and then maybe just take out like 10 to 15 minutes beforehand. But if it's a hot summer day, you can enjoy it right out of the fridge. It's not going to have as much aroma happening when you do that, but you're probably just looking for that refreshing element of the high acidity and lighter body. You really don't need to decant a Sauvignon Blanc. Maybe you could with one from Pouilly-Fumé if it's like the reductive quality is too reductive, which basically means that there hasn't been as much oxygen, and they took out the oxygen in the wine itself. And so that you could maybe like throw in a decanter fast and then put it back in the bottle, and that will kind of like wake it up a little bit. Aging a Sauvignon Blanc, again, not usually. You can, the one that I see most common is you can age a sweet Sauterne, and that's because that high sugar and high acidity. And then some high-end Sauvignon Blanc, but I would ask before you considered aging it. You typically want your Sauvignon Blanc to only be about 3 to 5 years old at the most. Cost-wise, you can easily find great bottles, $15 to $20. You can find great bottles around $10. And then higher-end bottles, I'd probably spend $30 to $40, and probably not much more than that. Food-wise, I love Sauvignon Blanc with fresh salads. It's one of those wines that works with vegetables that can be a little bitter. One of its famous pairings, if you're looking for a simple wine and cheese pairing, is chèvre, so fresh goat cheese. There's this really great one that I pick up. It's at Trader Joe's, but it's also at other grocery stores. It's like this honey goat cheese. Oh, that and Sauvignon Blanc, great pairing. And for anything else, just think light. Think chicken, turkey, fish, crab. That's the kind of meat that we want. Again, it goes really well with a lot of vegetables. You can make it work with asparagus, mushrooms, fresh greens. It does work with that. And anything herbaceous, either whether it's a sauce, a salad again. Like if you've got a lot of herbal flavors happening, yeah, you should pair it with a Sauvignon Blanc. So are you ready for a glass of Sauvignon Blanc? Because I know I certainly am. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as a reminder, I'm always very curious to hear your thoughts on the episode. And I'd love for you to let me know what varietals or what grapes do you want me to cover next. So far, we've learned about Chardonnay, Cabernet Franc, Chenin Blanc, Riesling, Barbera, Merlot, and now Sauvignon Blanc. If you haven't heard those episodes, go back and listen to them. They are great. And then just message me on Instagram at Cork and Fizz or email me, Haley at Cork and Fizz, and let me know which grape do you want to learn about next. If you love this episode as much as I did, I'd love it if you could take a quick second to rate it and leave a review. And if you know a wine lover in your life who would enjoy this, please share it with them. It would mean the world to me. In next week's episode, we are diving into wine certifications. This is a question that I get a lot, and I did a lot of research on myself when I was looking into wine certifications. And so if you want to learn about wine, you don't need a wine certification. In my opinion, there are a lot of ways to learn without taking a formal class or a formal certification, but it could be fun to look into, and especially if you want to work in the wine world. This would probably be a good idea, but there are lots of options. So the podcast, I thought it'd be fun to kind of go over all the different types of certifications, why you would do one, why you might want to look into it, what the cost is, what the time, the amount of time you need to spend is, all those kinds of things. And I'll share my own experience about what certification I chose and why I decided to do that. Thanks again for listening. And if you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in exploring new wines and joining an incredible community of wine lovers, be sure to sign up for my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. Head to thecorkcrew.com to learn more and use code WINESPECIAL, no space, WINESPECIAL, to get your first 2 months for just $8 a month. Cheers!